Hi, Allie. Welcome to Soulful IVF.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, this is a treat. Like you and I got to meet just this past fall when
Right.
ASRM was here in Denver, and I was so excited when I got to connect with you, learn more about your story, and the work you're doing is so important. So I'm so excited that you're here for
Thank
us.
you. Was that your first ASRM?
It was. How
Mine
about you?
too. Mine too.
Yeah.
Yeah. I loved the experience. I loved the people that I met.
Yeah.
It was friends for life, I think, on with a
For
lot of you.
sure.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
For anyone that doesn't know, ASRM is American Society for Reproductive Medicine. So the annual
Yeah,
conference was here in Colorado, and you're based in Florida.
I am. Yes. I
And
actually went, yeah, I went to a concert and then flew straight to Denver and was a
oh, you
little late to
did?
the conference. Yeah. I was at Taylor Swift in Miami and then I flew straight
Oh,
to Denver.
I'm so jealous. Oh my God. How amazing. Wow. Well,
Yeah.
we're going to be talking all about the work you do, reproductive law, and your fertility story because, you've lived it. You've lived through fertility's challenges. And I don't know. I want to hear your story. Like, did you ever anticipate stepping into this work as a reproductive lawyer? Like your passion behind doing the work you're doing? Like, give us the
Right.
rundown on like
No,
your
I did
background.
not. So I'll go back, I guess. So I think so what's crazy. So I had always wanted to be a lawyer. Like I just always wanted to be a lawyer since I was really, really young. My father's a lawyer. And I still remember us headed to a vacation to Florida to see my grandparents. My father was running late because he got pulled into an emergency hearing. My mom thought it'd be cute for us to go up and watch him, right? So I watched my dad in a courtroom and thought, I want to do that. And my dad, of course, was like, don't be a lawyer. So do anything else. Don't be a lawyer. So, anyways, I just always knew I wanted to be a lawyer. And I actually didn't know if I wanted to be a mom. Like it sounds so crazy. I always worked with kids, but I just felt like I think part of it was I struggled with I had a lot of female issues. Like I was in the hospital a couple times for cysts. I had like, I just would like have my period all the time, which is very inconsistent. So I think in my brain, I knew there's going to be an issue. I don't know. You like deep down in your gut,
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
like you go through stuff and I don't know, you just watch
Your
everyone
inner
around
knowing.
you. Right. Like this weird feeling of, I don't know if this is going to, I think I'm gonna have trouble. So I think part of it was that. And then the other part was I am not someone who does things halfway. Like if I'm in this all the way. And so to me, it was like, I'm going to practice law. How do I become a mom and practice law? Like that just sounds insane to me. I worked at firms where I would be the first one in, first thing in the morning, work all day, go home, eat a quick dinner, get right back on my computer. So I thought, okay, well, I can't bring a kid into this. This is crazy. But everyone around me was having kids and my parents very badly wanted grandkids. And so, yeah, so I started seeing a therapist to see like, can I do this or whatever? So then, yeah, so we decided we would just try to not try or whatever, like see how things go. And
Yeah.
then, yeah, started struggling right away, kind of like I said, I didn't know when I ovulated. I didn't, they're like, use these sticks and all this stuff. And I'm like, they never come up positive. And the doctor was like, oh, you're peeing on them wrong. And I'm like, I mean,
What?
I read the instructions, like maybe, I guess, but I'm pretty sure it says, you know, put it in a cup, whatever. And so, yeah, so finally they tested me and said, yeah, you're not ovulating. You need to go see a specialist. So, yeah,
Can
so I
I
started,
jump in? How
yeah.
long were you practicing law at this point? Like,
Okay, so I started practicing law in 2009.
okay.
So we got married in 12 and then we had like a bucket list type of thing. And then, so yeah, so this was 2016
Okay.
um,
Okay.
that I started with the fertility specialist. So
Right.
before
Right.
that, we just,
Okay.
and yeah, so the fertility specialist, everyone was, in the area said he's the best, he's great. I had friends who got pregnant from him. And side note, like, I don't like this, but he had one of those clinics where you walked in, there were pictures of babies everywhere, which I tell people all the time. It's so triggering. Please don't do, don't do that.
Uh-huh.
But there were babies everywhere, right? And people would bring in their babies while I was there. And anyways, I struggled with him. He recommended right away going on medications. I did that for a while. And then I did 6 IUIs.
Oh, wow.
And the sixth IUI, he said to me, what was the result of your HSG test? Which, as most people know, is like where you check to make sure the fallopian tubes are open and you can, drop an
Yeah.
egg and get pregnant and all that stuff. And I said, I don't know what that is. And he said, "Oh, you would know what that was, sweetie." And I was like,
sweetie, come
yeah,
on. Oh,
I know. So I left
oh,
that day. I had not told anyone we were going through this yet. I called my friend. She said, "Oh my gosh, I cannot. How many IUIs have you had?" And I said, 6. And she said, "I cannot believe you did that many IUIs without ever doing an HSG test." And so, yeah, so that kind of led me. I got all my documents. He gave them to me in a paper form, and I went to another clinic. And when I went to that clinic, they said, I went in with all of our stuff, and they said, "You need to be genetically tested, you and your husband." And I said, "No, we already have that. Here are our results." And they said, "Well,
mm.
it's not through the company that we use." And I said, "Well, I don't think my DNA changes. And I don't think his DNA changes."
Oh my
So
God.
just kind of, so I left that clinic. So I just kind of like kept having moments of just like really frustrated. And I just felt like I'd ask questions, and I'm a person who wants to know everything. I felt like I wanted to know why this was happening. And I know that's not always explained, but I just felt like there were just things that kept happening. And I'd ask questions and I'd push. And a lot of places were very receptive to that. And a lot of places were not. And so I felt like it just kept hitting a wall of, okay, why do I feel bad for asking questions? This is so important.
Mm.
I'm this is impacting every moment of my life.
Yeah.
I feel like I have no control, but the only I can control is what I ask and what I know and my information. So I just kept asking questions. And yeah, I felt like a lot of places didn't deal with that very well. So yeah, I kept moving around, and then ultimately ended up at a wonderful clinic. And there I had, so I went through IVF there, and that
Mhm.
led to my daughter, who's now 5. But yeah, I think that was kind of my start of, wow, this is a very strange experience. Like, I feel as though the information is hard to get, the questions are hard to get answered. I found amazing people online later for when I went to go back, but I just felt like it was one of those things where, wow, you really have to speak out for yourself. Unlike
Mm.
any other area I dealt with medicine. I don't know. It's just a strange thing. And what's weird is so in my normal job as a lawyer, not normal, but what I'd been doing is suing insurance companies for property insurance claims. So if you get a hurricane claim down here and you feel underpaid, or they deny it and you disagree, you retain me, and then I fight your insurance company. And oddly, I felt like with IVF, there's so little insurance that like the
Mhm.
insurance carriers aren't asking, right? Like, I'm paying for these things. I'm having to ask, why am I paying for this? Or why am I doing this? And so it just kind of led to a lot of questions, like, why is this happening and why is that happening? And so I never really planned to do this in my practice.
Mhm.
Um, I just, I think, and you know this, I mean, this is probably like, once you've been through fertility treatments. So like I said, I kept it really quiet. Once I had my daughter, I felt more like open, right? And that kind
Uh-huh.
of, which I tell
Mhm.
people all the time, because they'll say, "Oh, I don't know, you're so brave." I'm like, I was not. Like, nobody knew. My own family didn't know. My
Oh, wow.
mother
Okay.
didn't know. Nobody knew until after the
Mhm.
fact. And then I was like, I journaled, I'd seen a therapist, I had all these things written down. I'm like, okay, now I feel comfortable. I'm going to throw
Mhm.
that stuff
Mhm.
online to the universe. And then, yeah, it just started meeting people online. But yeah, they'd ask me questions like, "Hey, what should I expect? Or what questions should I ask?" And I kept telling people, like, advocate for yourself. Like, do not be afraid to ask questions. If there's something that you don't like or that feels off, ask, because you'll stay up all night saying, "I wish I would have asked this," or "I wish I would have said this," instead of,
Yeah.
like, you're never up at night for the things that you did speak out about, but you're always up at
Yeah.
night about the things you didn't. So yeah, so it
Yeah.
just kind of led to this, people are saying like, "Okay, now as a lawyer, what do you think?" And I was like, "Oh, well, I've never thought about what I think as a lawyer." So that
Wow.
just kind of started leading to this. So it just happened super organically. Like,
Mhm.
people would call and say, "Hey, is this actionable?" Or, "Is this a situation where I should pursue something? Or is this normal? Or should I ask this question?" And so I just kept thinking through those things from like a legal perspective. And I think one thing that I had was that I already knew IVF, right? I already knew fertility. So people would use terms and they'd be like, "It's so nice to know that you can understand this from that standpoint." Because I know that I talked through some of my stuff with lawyers like that. Like, even my doctor, when I first went to her and said I had 6 IUIs without HSG, she even said, she was like, "Do you want me to do the test now? Because do you want to pursue that,
Mm.
potentially consider pursuing that towards him to get some of that money back or whatever. And I said, I didn't want to know at the time. But when I talked about it with other lawyers, they didn't understand it. Like they didn't understand, like, it's like, if you haven't been through it, sometimes explaining fertility to people is very confusing. Like, what is this test? Why do you need it? Why is it bad that you paid for 6 IUIs? Why did you pay out of pocket? Like, so trying to explain that to people who haven't been through it, you feel like you're starting from like point A, right? So
it's another language, right?
What?
It's another language, right?
Oh, a whole nother, I mean, the terms and the things and like people also don't understand why that's loss of time and why that like impacts, like every single thing you do impacts your next thing in fertility, right? Like if your results are this, then you do this. If you're, like, so they didn't understand why did you do 6? And then why did that take so long? And why is it cost every time? So what are your damages? And so trying to explain that to someone who didn't get it was hard. And so, so it just led to a lot of, it just kind of led to slowly people asking for this or that. I would get calls like, hey, someone has a question. And I'm like, yeah, sure, let's listen to it. Or, hey, can you read this document? Or, hey, I sent over my records request and I feel like I didn't get everything. Is that because I'm not allowed to, or should I fight it? And so, a lot of it was just, here, let me send a letter. And sadly, when a letter comes from a lawyer's letterhead, sometimes there's a little bit of a different response than just coming from like a patient portal, right? So it was just, especially like document requests were a big thing up front. Understanding contracts, like the first contracts we sign are so detailed and you sign away so many rights that people don't even realize. They're just like, you walk in, you want to get started, especially, I remember when I got to IVF, I was ready. Like, all right, I went on vacation to California. Like, let's do this. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to devote my whole life to this. I was just going to sign anywhere. Right. And then later realizing, oh my gosh, I signed to, just all kinds of stuff. Like you can just things that could happen with my embryos and things that could happen with my treatment and things that the only pages I remember really paying attention to were like, what was going to happen if I died, which is horrible to say. But do you remember that? Like there's like the whole, right.
If you or your spouse passes, if you separate, do you want your embryos like saved, discarded, donated to science?
Right.
There was no talk of having a lawyer like when we were going through our fertility path. And, I have a million questions going through my mind right now.
Sorry, but that's like, that's what I mean, because people said they just didn't really think of, and I remember thinking at that moment, we're having some pretty serious conversations, me and my spouse, but you're starting and you're excited and you think like, there's no way anything's going to go wrong. Right. But then it puts so much stress on you as a relationship and just you in general, that things happen all the time. And just, when you've signed them, it's like, well, can we change them now? Can we do this? Can we do that? And people don't realize they can't, you can do a secondary document saying, hey, I want to change to this, or people think like, oh, I signed that. And like, I started mine in 2016. I didn't have my daughter till 2019. Like if something comes up and you want to change something, you can, but people think, oh, I can't ask for that, or I can't do that or whatever. And they don't realize, you can send a letter, an email or something saying, hey, I'd like to do this instead. Or, hey, I want to donate to science instead of, just whatever it may be. But people are they're not aware and they don't know what all they've signed off on.
Oh, so back to that test. What was the result of that?
Well, the HSG. Right. So I never got it done because I thought I can't handle this. I just, because we'd already done 6 IUIs. So I felt like it was time for IVF, like
IVF. Okay.
Right. I felt as though I'd given it my best try, my best effort. I was starting over with a new clinic, or no, a new doctor. My doctor left that clinic. So I kind of wanted that is when I switched clinics. So the IUIs were at one clinic. I was starting a new clinic. She looked through my stuff. She recommended IVF anyways. She said 6 IUIs is a lot of IUIs to not get pregnant. I recommend IVF. And so she said, do you want me to do HSG test? Because HSG doesn't matter for IVF. It really matters for IUI. And so I said, no, I don't want to know. Cause I felt like I don't know, where my mind was and how upset I had been about the fact that I'd spent all this time and money. And his clinic was far from my house. I drove, I'd leave work, drive up there. And so I just didn't really want to know.
Okay.
So I never found out.
Did they give you a diagnosis why you needed IVF?
So my diagnosis was, so we both had issues. So my husband had low motility, and then I had Well, they believed it was PCOS. And then, yeah, I don't know. So what happens with me, which is like, so what's weird is they don't know exactly what it was. Like if it's, because they found an issue with my thyroid. So I was diagnosed with Hashimoto's. And then also the issue of potentially PCOS, which was me having those cysts and everything. But what would happen is my body would like, the follicles would grow, but nobody would take over. Like no egg would be like, me, it's my turn. Like they would just kind of either burst and I'd have a cyst, or, like my lining would just start to take. And then I thought I was having a period my whole life, but that was really just my body didn't know to like release an egg. So,
Okay.
yeah, so they said there were a few different reasons that could have been happening. I will say the thyroid was a big game changer for me. I don't know.
Mhm.
I don't know if that's ultimately like what happened, but my
Okay.
second child is actually natural. So I started IVF again. And when we did the mock transfer, we did the testing, everything looked fine. And then when they called in my medications, and then I found out I was pregnant.
Okay.
So,
And total rounds of IVF, how many rounds?
so I did one round, 2 transfers, and then went back to do another round. So my first retrieval was 4 embryos. They put in 2 embryos, neither took. I didn't even make it to the 2-week wait. I was like, it just didn't work at all. And then the second round, they put in 2 embryos, and I got pregnant with both. But I miscarried my daughter's twin around 13 weeks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So,
Thank you for sharing. Oh my gosh.
yeah.
Okay. So the work you're doing, and like, I really
Yeah.
want to focus on this because I feel like so many people are have questions. You mentioned all the paperwork that we sign when we start this process.
Mhm.
We're kind of, like you said, signing our life away, whatever. What, what should we be watching? What should we be looking for
Mhm.
as we're filling these out? And again, we had no legal representation ever during our course and all the things. I just want to know from you, like, what can we be looking out for?
Right. So anything in there that gives the clinic the ability to just do something, right? Like for example, one of the things is what they can do with your embryos. For example, based on if you do genetic testing or if you do pre-implantation genetic testing, certain results they can either discard, they can freeze them, or keep them frozen. You can donate to science, all that kind of stuff. A lot of them may have a form where you get to pick that. Some do not. It may be just in their policies and procedures where it just says, if it comes back with an aneuploid result, we discard. And there are people who say, I wish I would have maintained those, or depending on how their journey goes, because the hardest part, I think, is you fill out this giant booklet of information when you have no idea what's about to happen, right? Like you have not started to stim, you have not done a retrieval, you literally have no idea what's going to happen, none whatsoever. And so you're making these decisions with not being able to see the future, right? Like you're deciding everything on day one. And like I said, you're super excited. So you're like, woohoo, sign here, dotted like everything. And just saying, I'll do this, I'll do that. Everything. Cause you think in your mind at that point, I'm going to, I'm do stims, I'm going to get 100 eggs, which is impossible, but like, and then I'm going to have all these embryos and all this. And you like, cause that's what you think. Like, I think so many people think that's what IVF is going to do. And then it doesn't. And you're like, oh, wow, I wish I had known, how this was going to be. I wish I would have known I would have one or whatever. And so I think that's a really hard thing to decide a lot of those items up front because you have no idea what's to happen. Right. And so I think a hard part is the pages that require additional initials, or I think sometimes you have to notarize too. I don't know if you guys had to notarize
I
anything.
think we did. We did.
Right. So people pay a ton of attention to those pages because it's like, oh, I had to get a notary, or all of a sudden a witness comes in to help me sign that page, but then they don't notice all the other pages, right? Where they're signing. So I tell people, I'm like, I know it's a lot to read, but really sit down and read it. And if there's anything that you're questioning about their policies or procedures, ask them. Like they have to explain to you why that's their policy or why that's their procedure or why they may do what they do. And so then you're able to look it through it and say, okay, these are things I'm not comfortable with, or these are things I have questions about. And it's amazing to me how many people I like don't know why something happened. And then later they find out, oh, my contract says that. Like one thing lately, people want to move their embryos. This has been a huge thing because states are states are controlling a lot of things now. one state to another is totally different. So people have been wanting to move their embryos. And so then they look and they're like, oh my gosh, I said, for example, if I move my embryos, I couldn't use this clinic anymore. Or if I, or they'll be told you can't move your embryos. And then we look at their contract and it's like, no, right here it says you may move your embryos, but you have to sign another form or whatever. And so people are like, I wish I would have known that, because here I've been fighting with them about it, but they don't know. Go back to your first original documents and see what they say. And so I think, and that's the other thing, when you start with a clinic, you assume this is going to be my clinic, right? Forever. I feel good here. And sadly, just there may be something that you feel like, I want a second opinion, or I want to have another look at this. And so knowing, okay, what happens if I do that? If I go to another clinic, or if I choose to move my embryos, what are my rights? What can I do? And for the most part, it's usually a misunderstanding when people think they can't move them, like they're your embryos. But I will say that there has been a lot of confusion on that lately, especially like when Louisiana, or when Alabama happened. People were like, I can't move my embryos. And I said, okay, take a breath. Like, let's talk this through. But yeah, so I think those are a lot of the things in there, is just telling you what especially is going to be done kind of through your process, for example. Or I don't know, there's other things in there, like when they won't proceed with, like when they won't move forward with a procedure, for example, like obviously there's all these things, right? There has to be, your lining has to hit certain numbers, your so people are like, I didn't know that this could get canceled or whatever. And the clinic has the right to do that, but just making sure you understand kind of what those policies are. And like we talked about, there's tons of weird words. Some of that stuff may make absolutely no sense at this point. Like, you're like, what does that mean? And what are you testing? But at least asking them and saying, okay, it says your clinic could cancel my transfer if, can you explain these to me? Or it says that, this may happen. What do I need to be aware of? What do I need to know? So you're not so shocked when those things happen.
Would you recommend for those starting off on this path to have a lawyer review these documents with you? Is that something?
I mean, I don't think it would hurt, but I also know you're spending a lot of money on a lot of things. So for me to say like, yes, you should go pay for a lawyer to also do this is kind of hard, just because for the most part, I'm happy to do it for people in general, because I don't charge them. I'm just like, hey, I want everyone to know, like, I went through it. I wish someone would have helped me through it for some of this stuff. So let me take a look. And you'd be surprised how many clinics have very similar documents. Like there's a template that they kind of like, once you start to look at a few of them, you'll notice similar sentences or fonts or things like that. So a lot of times it's mainly the things that are specific to a specific clinic, like the additional documents that you need to start paying attention to. But I think there's amazing lawyers out there. Any like contracts lawyer can look at something like this also. But IVF lawyers are going to have a little bit more of a understanding of some of the nuances of it. So it's like, if you're able to, then but if you can't, but for the most part, like your clinic really should be able to answer those questions for you. And if they can't, that's a huge red flag, right? Like if they can't explain to you, why am I signing this away? Or why is this your policy? That's a good reason to say, maybe, okay, I want to have to talk to someone about this. But I also know time is hard too, because it's like we talked about, I knew as soon as I signed these documents, we're going to start my process, right? We're going to start tracking my cycle. We're going to do this and that. Like, I didn't want to slow down that process, but taking that extra moment to read through it, to say, okay, I want to understand what's here and what's not there.
Yeah, we know this process is extremely expensive.
Right.
So we're trying to save as much money as we can, but how do we prevent not needing you? Really?
Right. Exactly. Right. And that's what I'm saying. It's one of those things where for the most part, most people are never going to need me. Right. Like sadly I come in, I do a couple things. Like I do a lot of areas of just like helping people read their documents, understand them. I get Instagram messages all the time that are, hey, this says this, what the heck does that mean? Or what did I do? But mostly people call me when things go wrong, or they think something went wrong. And then it's, hey, what are your thoughts? And a lot of times I say to them, I'm so sorry that happened, but fertility is hard. Like a lot of things happen that nobody's at fault. And I think our human nature is to try to find somebody at fault, but a lot of times nobody is, right? Like this just things happen. And so, but I'll take a look at stuff and say, okay, let's look into this, or let's contact them, or even just sending an email sometimes. Hey, let's make sure you understand this correctly. Cause you're talking to someone on the phone, your emotions are high, you're upset. Let me send an email for you or whatever and say, hey, is this what you meant? Or can we talk about this? And then slowly, it kind of starts to, we work through it together. Cause I think the clinics, people in this field are of the position that they want to get people babies, that's their goal, right? So it's a very amazing science, a very amazing area of medicine. A lot of us couldn't have kids without it. And well, all of us are in it because we couldn't have kids without it, or we couldn't build our families without it. So I think the process is wonderful. It's just a matter of making sure that you feel like you're working with the people who are helping you versus like them working against you. Does that make sense? Like, I feel like you're just,
no, you're needed. You're needed. We need you. um,
I don't know. I wish I'm never needed. That's kind of how I feel about all things. It's like, I tell people all the time, even with property stuff, I mean, I hope you just file a claim and it gets paid and you never have to call me. And that's how I feel about this too. It's, when people are like, I think I'm missing this document or this document. And I say, well, let's look into it. But I wish they'd just give you all your stuff, right? I wish you never needed to call me and say, hey, am I missing something here? Do we need to fight this? I mean,
and
I
how
think,
do we know what we're missing too? Right.
right.
We don't know
So,
what we don't know.
right. No. So, for example, like you send a records request, right? So when you send a records request, most clinics have some sort of system they want you to use or a form they want you to use. There's also HIPAA forms and authorizations, and there's laws here that say your data is your data, your information is your information. That includes data information about your embryos. Okay, so anything that you should be getting, like you can get your billing, you can get your notes, you can get all of it. So you are supposed to get a whole thing. So I remember when I left that clinic to go to a new clinic and they gave me my paper documents and said, all your records are ready, come grab them. None of my billing was in there. And I went back, walked back in and said, hey, I don't see anything here about what I've paid you. I don't see anything here about all the checks, like all the payments I made. And what was crazy was 6 months later, they hit me up and said, you never paid us. Like they said, I owed them a couple $1,000s. And I was able to go back in and say, no, here's the billing you gave me. Here's my credit card statement. This is where I paid you. I want in writing that like I paid you in full and I'm out. So yeah, but so the point being like, you should get all that stuff, especially they're supposed to provide you with, if something's like, if you look at them, they'll have all the, if you get blood drawn, like all those results should be in there. And so the people will notice that they'll say, like even the genetic testing, for example, that I said, I had the ones from me, but like I had to do another request to get my husband's. Well, we needed his to also go to the next clinic to say, hey, I'm a carrier for this, but he is not a carrier, right? And yeah, it was just one of those things where it's just kind of going through it and making sure you have all those notes and all the data and all the results and just anything that you like went through and did, just making sure you have all of it. And then making sure that you can like, I'm trying to think what else. So like for genetic testing, like PGTA, there's always the data that the results are based upon. And so we fought with someone recently that they were not providing that data. And they were saying that wasn't part of the record set. You get the results, but you don't get like the graphs and the raw data and everything it's based upon. So we fought that. And recently we just got that. So we just got that this last week. But yeah, those individuals, they were telling them, no, you don't get that. And so, and they didn't know, they contacted me and said, hey, I think we need this. Like, we're trying to make decisions about our embryos, especially like right now with this climate. People have to make decisions earlier. And they said, look, we've been told these are non-viable, but we want to see it. Like I just want to put my eyes on it. Like I have a result report, but I just want to see it because I know the middle line means one thing. And if you're further away, and he was like, I don't know. I just want to see it. Like, I just want to see that what it looks like, I don't know. He's like, I'd feel better. And really they can't ask you why you want it. Like that's not allowed under HIPAA. If you request it, you're supposed to get it. So you don't have to
from these genetic testing companies.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, so we fought with that one and we got it this last week. But he was shocked. Like I called him, I was like, we just got your data. And he said, I can't believe it. But I just said, I was like, I've read the HIPAA rules. I feel like you are supposed to have this. This is what your results are based upon. You're supposed to have that data and know what your results are based upon. And I've seen lately, like, clinicians posting on their Instagram, like if you're concerned about your results, ask for the data, ask for the information that it's based upon. And, I think that's been one thing that a lot of people didn't know that they should get. And I think we're still going to have to kind of fight that because it's kind of new, but I do feel like I personally, based on my review, felt like it was part of it. So we fought that. And yeah. And whether I don't know why they finally gave in. I don't know if they, whatever, but yeah, I just feel like there's certain things that people are like, if they're told they can't have it, they just assume, right? And it's like, maybe
Yeah.
you should ask. If you would feel better if you had it, why not at least ask if you can get it?
Yeah. Advocacy. That's what it's about.
Right. Which
I
is
mean,
hard.
we did genetic testing and we weren't sent the results. I was told, but I remember like, this is just bringing me back. And I wished I would have fought a little more to get some of that actual data.
So you never even got the report?
I remember getting something through the phone. Um, our 4 embryos, our first 4 from our first egg retrieval were not healthy genetically. And I didn't get as much specific as I would have liked to, but it would have resulted in a miscarriage or, would have implanted, wouldn't have become a healthy baby. So went through another egg retrieval, got 3 embryos, I tested and found we had one
Okay.
healthy. But yeah,
Yeah.
I mean,
No,
asking, I don't remember them specifically sending something from the genetic testing company, like more a detailed report. So
no, there should have been a report. And so
Mm.
and that's the genetic testing company creates a report and sends it to the clinic where it puts out like, and even will tell you which chromosomes, what was additional, what was like on
I
that
was told
biopsy, what
verbally,
it
like over the phone.
right, which is a lot. It's a lot to take in, right?
I
Like,
was like heartbroken.
right,
Yeah, yeah, that's a whole other
right. I
story.
mean, I remember, so mine, with my, so yeah, because you get those calls. I was just talking to someone
Mm.
about those calls because it's, every single one is like, it goes down, it
And it
goes up.
happened at my clinic too, when I was like checking in for another appointment and I was like
Right.
checking in for this next procedure. And I remember getting that call and just collapsed, like devastating, devastating.
Right.
Like,
Yeah. And, and that's something, I mean, that has nothing to do with law, but like from an advocacy standpoint, I know that there's like some of us who have spoken out a lot about that stuff, right? About, giving maybe a time when you're going to call and being within that at a certain period, because like where you get some of these,
yeah.
this information is if you're driving, if you're,
Yeah.
in the middle of, I mean, just places that people have
Yeah.
told me they've been when they've gotten these phone calls. I mean, I remember I used to get the phone call. I would know the number, run to my car, sit in the parking lot because I didn't want to get the information in my office, cry, and then like,
Mm.
and then go back
Mm.
in and keep working. Right. And I work in a pretty, like, our firm is small. I was only
Mhm.
dealing with, 6 people or whatever versus being in these big buildings, having, I mean, yeah. And
Yeah.
just having to go in and deal with that. Like, it's just, and I know that
Yeah.
they're busy. I'm not,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff, but I just think that there should be some of that stuff that we can
Yeah.
maybe make it a little bit easier on patients because it is the
I
emotional
agree.
side of this is sometimes so lost
It's
where,
overwhelming.
yeah, like the goal is to get you pregnant, but like the emotional side and the mental side is not handled as well.
Mhm.
But yeah, you're supposed to get a report. Like there's a report. I mean, you
Mhm.
can ask for it. You're supposed to get it. I think it helps too, because a lot of times I'll talk to people and they're like, I don't remember. Like I know I had all 4 embryos had an abnormal result, but I have no idea what chromosome or, was it plus 21? Was it a negative, a
Yeah.
trisomy 18?
I learned the numbers, but so
Yeah,
would you suggest individuals like keep all of your embryos no matter what?
I personally recommend keeping them
Mm.
until you're done with your journey.
Yeah.
I know, like, I'm not a doctor. I
Yeah.
don't pretend to be a doctor. I know I've talked to several doctors who are of the same opinion. Just because IVF is new. Like it actually is not that old. I mean, Elizabeth Carr, she's
Yeah,
not that old. Like
yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's just not. I watched Joy and I thought, wow, this is like, the
Mm.
science is amazing, but it's pretty new and we're still learning things and we're still
Yeah.
trying to make it better. And we're still trying to, we learn things all the time. Like, I mean, I think
Yeah.
they just the other day said they, created the first baby from, I don't even remember what it was now, but the way that they did the egg was different and the way that they did the procedure. And so we're constantly learning. And so the
Mhm.
hardest part has been people who like mosaics, for example, right? Like
Yeah.
embryos with a
That's a big
mosaic.
topic.
Oh, huge, right? And so the testing has gotten better. And like they've said it's gotten better. And they've changed their thresholds and they've added this mosaic area that we didn't know so much about. And now they're saying, some of these mosaics have just as good of a chance as a euploid embryo. And we have people that we're talking to all the time saying, I wish I would have held on to that mosaic, but I was told there was absolutely no chance and whatever. And now I'm 42 and at 37, I had a mosaic and like, I wish I would have kept it. Right.
Mhm.
And so it's just the thought of, I wish you would, just,
Yeah.
and I will say we've also had issues too. We have people who get phone calls saying, hey, we made an error. Like
Yes,
it
I've heard
should
that
not,
too.
I'm sorry, the
Ah,
amplification went wrong. or the biopsy process was wrong or something, your results are not what they should have been. And then these people are going, we've made calls before trying to like find these embryos to see if there's any chance they haven't been donated to science yet or whatever.
Oh
And
my
then
God.
luckily they are, or they're not. It just depends. But the
Yeah.
point being, like, I don't think, I mean, at some point you like, who wants to pay storage fees for a million years, right? But like, if you're still in your journey, you still think there's a chance you're going to want to transfer. Like, I think for most people, I'm like, look, we're learning so much. I've learned so much. I learned during my journey. I'm still learning. I'm a huge nerd. I was up at this morning on my bike reading all kinds of new research. I just think it's better to, yeah, like it breaks my heart how many people are just
Yeah,
shocked
me
that they
too.
didn't maintain them. And I like that comes back to those documents in the beginning, because a lot of them do have policies where if the result is this, then we discard or you donate to science. And I think a lot of people are like, I wish I would have said, no, hold on to that. Let me decide
Yeah.
once I'm done,
Oh, it's
you know, because
heartbreaking. I've heard those stories too. It's like a genetic testing company saying it wasn't a healthy embryo when then they came back and said, oops, it was a healthy embryo.
right.
Like, what?
Right. I know. It's heartbreaking. Or, hey, oh, we think that these ones with chaotic results are actually a testing error. And it's like, but people are saying it says chaotic abnormal. So it's in their brains, it's like, there's no way that this could possibly be transferred. And then suddenly, like, what do you do with that? Right.
Mhm.
And so I think it's a lot of that. I think also, I think, hopefully that then relates to clinics, right? Like, a lot of clinics won't transfer those. I mean, there's still clinics right now who are fighting transferring mosaics, and people are like, but ASRM said, and this said, and whatever, we should transfer mosaics. And there's clinics who won't do it.
Mhm.
And so I think sometimes we have to really push for that stuff, is say, hey, and that's what's so hard about this area, is I feel like we go through so much, right? Like, you become like your own lawyer, your own doctor, your
Yeah.
own pharmacist, your own
Yes.
everything. And you're just going,
Yes.
what in the world? But sometimes you have to fight for all these things and say, hey, have you read the most recent this and that? But that shouldn't be your job. Like, you are a patient. These
I
are
agree.
people who have, the ability to know this information. They should be doing that stuff. But it's amazing how often people will call me and say, like, hey, you commented on this. What's the research? I'd like to go take it to my clinic and say, hey, I want to transfer this embryo because, and I'm like, okay, let me send you the
Mhm.
research, or, whatever, this doctor. Because
Mhm.
yeah, they feel like they have to fight for everything to try to protect them. And I think a lot of people feel like the first step of their IVF, the first step of being parents almost, is like this process, right? Because your hope is you get to transfer the chance of a baby. Like, we all know
Yeah.
that there's no guarantees or anything, but it's like, so people take control of every single process because they're trying to get to that end point. So that means, I tell people all the time, like, if my doctor had told me that I had a better chance of getting pregnant if I did salsa lessons, I would have signed up for like a salsa lesson every day. Or if they were like, you have to eat purple food, I would have ate like eggplant every day
Yeah.
and grapes
Yeah.
and like nothing else. It's just like, because you just follow whatever you're told,
I
because that
know.
is what you think will hopefully get you to that end goal. And so it's really hard to ask questions. It's really hard to question anything you're told. Like, you just don't want to, because you're just afraid that, potentially it could hurt your chances. And I hear it all the time, where I tell people, like, hey, ask them or say this, and they'll go, well, what if they tell me, oh, sorry, we can't treat you then? Or, hey, especially in places where there's not a lot of clinics, like where I'm located, there's a ton of clinics, right? But I talk to people who are like, but then the next clinic's 90 minutes away. I can't drive 90 minutes to go see a doctor. I can't not, and so they're like, I'm afraid to ask, or I'm afraid to push, or I'm afraid to do this or that. And it's so heartbreaking, because it's true. You can have very different treatment from one clinic to the next, and you can have very different experiences. Like, PGTA, for example, the results are different lab to lab. So like, you could have your embryos tested on lab A, and they determine it's this, and you could have them tested at lab B, and they could determine it's this, because they have different thresholds. They have different, the way they do the testing is different. And so that's like
Wow.
very hard for people. There's a research project where they did a blind, like four labs with
Uh-huh.
blind studies, and like the number of euploids versus like, and all of them is so different from lab to lab. And I was
Wow.
just like, wow, that's crazy, because you just don't
Yeah.
know.
We had
So,
one lab and we were told like one place and I didn't even shop around. I mean, would
right.
you recommend people do that to get
I don't know that you can.
okay.
It
Get a
depends
test.
on because I don't know. A lot of clinics like only work with one lab, or
Mhm.
only work with like one or two labs. Like, I'll know For example, like the clinic that I went to only worked with one particular lab. Like I was
Okay.
not given an option to talk to any other lab. It was just, but I don't know. Cause I don't know if I had gone, like I said, you don't ask questions, right? I don't know if I had asked them, hey, I want to get my embryos tested here or something like that, if they would have done that for me. Like, I don't know.
Okay.
I didn't
Yeah.
really ask because like I said, same thing. It was, they just, I didn't know what I didn't know then or what I know now. And
Right.
they just said, this is who we work with. And,
Okay.
I assumed that's who I should
Mm-hmm.
use. So, yeah, I just didn't realize that I honestly didn't know that there was such a difference in testing labs until, like I started looking into it more and then started realizing they don't all do it the same. Like they might use the same NGS system, but they use different, and the word's going to escape me right now, but there's different, like the amplification process. There's just a whole different process from one lab to the next. And so it can be very different depending on who you use.
Would you say genetic testing has been a big focus of your work right now? Like,
Yes.
okay.
Yeah, I think that was a huge thing that came out of what I've been doing. So, it kind of was one of these things where people were calling me, like we said, with, hey, what's your IVF hat say? And then what does your lawyer hat say? And it just kept being that people would say, hey, I went through all this. I got a phone call that I had, for example, 4 embryos like you had,
Mhm.
I was told it only takes one. Now I have 0. How did I
Mhm.
go to 0? And I
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah.
I don't know. How
Yeah.
did you go to 0? Or I had a friend who, she had one and she called and she was like, I have one. And I was like, it only takes one, be
Mhm.
positive. And then literally days later called me and said, I have 0. And I said, what do you mean you have
Mm.
0? And it was, well, this test said I have 0 now. I said, did you transfer it? And she said, no, this test said I have 0. So then just little things. And then actually that one later came back as mosaic and it was
Mhm.
already gone. But anyways, it just things like that. Like, so it just became one of these things I became very obsessed with, and started looking at, and that's when I started realizing like different things in different places and, one genetic testing lab over another and what they're telling you they can do versus what it can do. And like what the accuracy rates are and all that stuff. Like when you're being sold genetic testing, like it is sold. So like, I mean, all the things that it's sold as are like, how do you possibly say no? Like I remember, so when I first went through fertility treatments, it was 2000. Like I said, I started in 16. PGTA was not as common. Like it was like, hey, you could do it, but you're
That's
under
when I started
35.
too. That's when I
Right.
started.
Really? So yeah, so
Yep.
it was more like there's a test, but you don't have to do it, whatever. When I went back in 2019, wait, I had my daughter in 2019. I went back in 2020. It
Mhm.
was, you are over 35. This test is amazing. You have to do it.
Mm.
You should never, like, how would you possibly do IVF without it? And I said, well, I just did IVF. Like I did IVF without it. And now, and they pushed me so hard on it about how, all these things, it lowers your chance of miscarriage. It increases your chance of a healthy baby. Like all these things that when you're going through IVF and you want a child, how do you possibly say no to all that? Right.
Yeah.
Like,
You want to optimize,
um,
you want to just increase your chances in every
right.
way.
Oh, 100%. And so I was like, okay, well, I don't know. Let me sit with it. Cause I think I'm skeptical of all things. And so, and I just kept asking questions about, well, why, what about this? And what about that? And I felt like I wasn't getting the answers I wanted. And so then I ended up, like I said, I got pregnant with my second child without IVF. So I didn't
Mhm.
end up having like to choose. But at the
Mhm.
time, I felt like I just didn't know that I wanted to do it. I felt like it was getting pushed on me so hard
Mhm.
that I was just pushing back. So yeah, so that's when, yeah, I kind of became obsessed then. And then when I started having friends around me and family members losing embryos left and right to PGTI, I just felt like, wow, this just feels like it's a test that's really taken over in the last few years. And to the point that like everybody's being told to do it, or, it seemed like,
Yep.
and is it doing what they say it's doing? Because to me, those are really big claims you're making about something, right? Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
how do you make such a, like, all these things without making sure that it, like, are you sure that all these things are true? And if
Mhm.
you are, then yeah, we should probably all be doing it. But if not, like, there's a reason, right? So, yeah, and that's kind of what started. So I started investigating it now over 2 years ago, I think.
Yeah.
And yeah, I would just stay up at night and research it and talk to these people and talk to this person, that person, and get discussions on different labs and things like that. And then started meeting with experts, and experts were telling me like, yeah, you're right. This is, it's being oversold. Like, just like I said, I was listening to something recently and they were saying, yeah, they're misselling it in the United States to to
And
everybody.
who is the one misselling it?
The labs.
The
So the
labs.
labs put it out. Yeah. So the labs do the brochures and the websites. And like, I don't know about when you bought it, but when I bought it, I had to watch this cute little video. Like,
I don't remember watching a video.
we're like, oh, okay. Mine was a cartoon video and there was a woman like rocking a baby and it was all about, it's 98% accurate and your better chances of pregnancy and all these like little bubbles. And I just thought, just a very, I don't know, just a very like pretty little video and everything sounded great and wonderful. And yeah. And so then, yeah, and that's how they sell it. They sell it with all these, positive things. And so people just feel like they don't know anything negative until after the fact. Right. And then they start doing the research, they start talking to people, they look into it. And then they're like, I wish I would have known all this. I wish. And I think I've told people like, I don't know. I'm not trying to get rid of like PGTA. Like, I think information is important and especially in certain situations, but it's just like, I've been told by like hundreds and hundreds and more close to thousands of people who are like, if I had known the truth, I wouldn't have bought it. Like, I wish I would have known what it could and couldn't do and like been sold it in a way that was like truthful. Right. And if it's, so yeah, so that's what the big thing with the lawsuits that we filed was like, people were saying, this can't be, they needed to be the truth, we want truthfulness, we want transparency, we want what can the test do, and not just what can the test do, but each different lab, like what does this lab do? Have they validated their test? Like, does it do what they're saying it does? And then look at this other one over here. So that way you're comparing, like, what you're buying.
Transparency, right?
Right. And it's a product. I mean, PGTA is an add-on to IVF. It is it's not a product, it's a test, but it's like, it's something being added to IVF.
It's an elective add-on.
Right. And it's not purchased from your clinic, it's purchased from the lab and all that stuff. So it's just a very, it's a difficult thing. It's something you're adding on. A lot of times insurance doesn't cover it. So even when people do have insurance, they don't cover PGTA. So yeah, it's been kind of like, it's been busy. But I tell people all the time, like, we're not, we're very careful about, looking at all the advertisements, looking at what they're saying. Is it accurate? Have they validated? Is what they're saying the truth? And it's, are they selling it? You can't sell things in the United States without truth. That's kind of one of the reasons we have consumer fraud. And so, this has been one of those things where it just hasn't been regulated. Like IVF is not very regulated, in general, just because and I'm not saying I want like, I won't talk politics and all that, but I don't know that I want all this involvement, but from a standpoint of like, there's just certain things that shouldn't exist. Like there just shouldn't be, you shouldn't be able to, misleadingly and falsely sell something. And so that's what we think has been happening. And that's where the lawsuits came from. But it definitely is hard. I tried to do it other ways, but it just didn't, there's just no regulation in the United States on this as much versus other areas. So
you are giving so much good information. Like, was your firm one of the first to start that class action lawsuit?
Yeah. So technically I'm kind of the crazy one. Yeah. So so I, like I said, I did all the research. I did not sleep for a long time. I was having a lot of trouble. I was like, something has to be done. I love IVF. I wouldn't have my daughter without it, but like, what the heck is happening? And how do I help patients? Like that's kind of where my practice came from, right? Is like, how do I help patients? How do I help patients have a voice and have, advocacy and make sure that they're heard? Because I love everyone there. Like, I love these doctors. Some of them are wonderful and stuff, but it's like patients are a lot of times kind of lost in the process a little bit, or feel that way for sure. I know people all the time are like, I feel like a number at my clinic. And I'm like, that's horrible, so trying to make sure the voices were heard. So I then went to my law partner and said, hey, I think something's going on here. That where they're overselling this test. I think we need to look into this. So him and I started researching it together. Had a lot of talks that we never thought we'd have about kind of how, it's so funny. I told him because when I was going through IVF, I just told him, hey, I'm going through fertility. I don't want to talk about it. But yeah, we, I was kind of trying to explain to him the process and all these things. And then, we started digging into it pretty significantly. And then, we reached out to some other law firms to join to help because it just began, it's such a nationwide issue. And it's so big. And so, yeah, so we reached out to a couple. We're working with Justice Law Collaborative up in Boston. Their firm is awesome. They do all kinds of like amazing women, like women driven, especially. They did some of the, like they've looked at, like they helped with the Larry Nassar stuff, helping represent women against US gymnastics. They do like just all kinds of things. They looked into birth control when it was causing like heart attacks, things like that. So they're very into like women's health and those kind of issues. And then we also teamed up with Berger Montague, which is a large class action firm out of Philadelphia. So we have this like awesome team. We've been very fortunate. Like we get along very well. We meet multiple times a week because this has just gotten so big to try to make sure we're doing right by patients, that we're, making sure that these cases are handled in the right way. Like, there's a desire for change with this also. The hope is like you said, transparency and truth, and making sure that people understand, like ASRM, which we talked about in the beginning, like ASRM has said, this test should not be for everybody. Like it's not been proven. The few studies that have been done, like it should not be for all people. But then a lot of these labs will sell it as, this will help everybody's IVF and this will make you pregnant faster. And it's like, okay, wait a minute. Like, so that's what we're trying to do, is we want it to be truthful. We want it to be sold. I mean, if it's going to be sold and, in a way that's false and not false and misleading. So yeah, we have a really good team. We've been very fortunate. I will say it was definitely hard. The team we have is wonderful, but there were firms I took this to that were like, yeah, that's not like, that's confusing and too scientific and like, nobody will care. And I was like, yes, people have to care. Like, this is so important. This cannot be happening to people all over this, like IVF is getting bigger. More of us need this, this science to get pregnant. Like my thing that I kept telling people all the time when I kept pushing this, and they were like, sorry, we don't want to help, is if my kids have the same issues that I had and need IVF, like I do not want to sit back and see it in however many years and go, oh my gosh, why didn't I help like it be better for patients? Because I don't know if they're going to be patients one day. And it just like, and my family, like I have cousins who are, same thing, they're going through it and they're like, okay, explain this to me. Tell me about this, whatever. And I talked to a guy in a coffee shop the other day who was like, oh, what do you do? And I told him, and he goes, oh, well, I'm going to need an IVF when I'm ready to have kids. So, cause I'm probably going to go it alone. And he was like, so how can, thank you for doing what you're doing. And I was like, sure, no problem. So
you've started this movement. Wow, Allie.
Well, hopefully, I don't know if it's a movement, but it's just kind of like, I think
a call for change, So how many, oh gosh, so many questions. So how many genetic companies are out there, first of all?
How many genetic? There's a lot. So we're not going after all of them. Like I said, so we currently have 5. So we have 5 lawsuits currently pending. We have a group that's like group 2 based on, like I said, it takes a lot. So we have, so we've had over 2,000 people contact us from hearing about it.
Over 2,000 clients.
Yeah. So like, they're not all signed. Cause some of them, like some of the labs don't even exist anymore. They've either closed up or, and some of them have been bought out by other companies and things like that. But we've had, it kind of all happened. Like, this community is amazing. Like they're very outspoken, and so people have contacted us and then they tell someone who else contacts us. And then there was some advertising, but a lot of it's just been very internalized. So people reaching out to other people. And then, so then we sit down, we look at all their marketing materials, we look at the brochures, we look at the consent forms that they make the patients sign. We look at all that to make sure, like, does this line up with the science? Does this line up with the support that's out there? Does this adequately set forth what this test does? And if it doesn't, then we're like, okay, let's pursue this. If it does, and there's testing labs that, have validated their systems. There's testing labs that their marketing does set forth what the test can actually do and what it does. Because like, I think one of my favorite genetic counselors always says, like the results of PGTA are not like the embryo is this, the result is the embryo. This is a embryo with an abnormal result, because technically it's just the result, right? Because you're only taking a few cells from the trifectoderm, and then so then you're screening those cells. So like there are times when it doesn't show what the inner cell mass is, and there are times that the embryo can self-correct. Like that's what we're doing with all this mosaic stuff. So it's just the fact that she's like, no, this is a embryo with an abnormal result, not versus this is an abnormal embryo. Right.
Got it.
So, yeah, but so I've learned
Abnormal result. I like that.
yeah, because that's what it is. I mean, you're looking
embryo.
at it, you're screening it.
Yeah.
So yeah, so she taught me, it's funny. I reached out to her a long time ago and she's wonderful. And I've ran things by her where I'm like, make sure I'm saying this right. And she's like, no, that's right. And making sure you're just saying it correctly, doing it like because that way you understand it, right? Like if you understand that's an embryo with an abnormal result versus like an abnormal embryo, that then you understand like what you're dealing with and like why you might want to hold on to it till you're done with all your other embryos or whatever. Like that's different. But yeah, so we're learning. It's been a process. It's a lot. It's been a lot of research. I feel like I'm such a nerd, but
no, you're incredible. You've talked about obtaining fertility records. You've talked about like kind of the add-ons we touched on. I mean, there's so many things you help with, and I've read like through what your firm does: medical negligence, improperly or discarded embryos, which we talked a little bit about, errors and omissions by clinics and labs, the HIPAA violations. Like there's so much, right? We've only scratched like the surface of the things that you can go into, but
yeah, I think that's like the biggest thing is I always tell people, I'm like, I think it's hard because I think people see stuff that I do and they think I don't love IVF, and that's not true. I'm like, I love IVF. I think it's amazing. And I think I think there's something to be said for this is an amazing science. It's this wonderful thing. But I think when we look at if you look at Joy, we talked about Joy, what it started out as and some of what's been come in, some of these add-ons that have been added to it, like, are they better, right? Like, are they beneficial to us? Are they,
you're talking about the Netflix documentary?
Joy? Right. Yeah. So I watched the Joy.
People might be like, what are you talking about?
Right. Sorry. So Joy on Netflix. So I watched that and I thought like, this is amazing. And then, thinking like Elizabeth Carr posts all that stuff and you think about like where she came from. And
yes,
I think, but then there's a lot of things that have just come in and a lot of these clinics are purchased by, these big groups. And there's a lot of things that have changed in IVF that the issue is, is it for the better good? And like, that's where I think my thing is, we're fighting one test right now, but I think the issue is I just want to make sure that, I love IVF. I want it to exist forever.
You're the IVF advocate. That's your hand.
Right? Like I want to protect it. I want it to be available. I want insurance coverage. Like I want all these things for it. But I also think I want companies to know, hey, we are watching, like we are questioning if we're, we want to know like that what you're providing to us has been validated and has gone through the right proper channels. And you can't just, we're very vulnerable. Like we want babies so bad. You can't just sell us things without making sure it's proper. And I think that's sadly kind of what happens in this area because there's so little like regulation, and we are people who will say yes to a lot of things because we just so badly want that final thing. And it's like someone, so I think being looked out for and trying to make sure we're like, our voices are heard is very hard. So
grateful for the work that you do. I mean, and something else that's come to mind, and this might need a part 2 because AI, the future of technology with IVF and AI. And like, I can't even imagine the lawsuits that are going to come from like, do you see with transfers, fertilization, like robots doing this? I mean, not to open a can of worms, but I'm just curious, like, if you had to deal with anything in that area with AI.
I know. Well, I mean, what is so crazy to me is like, after starting to do this area, some of the calls I get sometimes where people are like, hey, this happened, or my clinic wants to do this, or my, I'm being offered this, or I saw this online and I think it sounds wonderful. I'm like, what? Like there are crazy things that are sold.
Can you give a few examples of what you're hearing?
I mean, I think people have talked about like even the testing that's coming forth where it's like, you can help you pick like the best, the embryo that has most likely to be like successful, for example. And it's, it's like, well, maybe, but I don't know. I'm curious, like, how do you know? Like what's it going to show? What's it look at? What is it, that kind of thing. Even, people have looked at like embryo glue or, some of the Alice testing, I think it's called ERA testing, like some of just a lot of stuff that gets added that a company will recommend. And then these clinics, I think these clinics, like they also want to get us pregnant, right? So like their goal is like, I want you to get pregnant. I want to call you with great results. So sometimes they're told these companies also. And so then it's like, okay, is this going to help or hurt? So there's just a lot of things. I don't know. It's crazy to me, the things I learn about, like people get offered and, I don't know. I'm amazed. Like people calling me being like, my embryos are being held hostage. I'm like, whoa, hold on a minute. Like, let's talk about it. What does it what do you mean
Wow.
they've been held hostage? Like, let's chat about it. Let's, like I said, let's make a phone call. Let's figure this out. And then trying to figure out like, okay, what does that mean? How do we move your treatment forward? Because the saddest part about IVF is that time is not on our side, right? So like when people have something go wrong, they don't have a lot of time to fight it out, right? So, I mean, even this, it's like, a lot of people are going, okay, so I don't know what to do with PGTA, blah, 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 but I'm in the middle of treatment and I've got embryos on ice and I've got this and I've got that. What should I do? And it's, they don't have time to wait. They don't have time to sit back and, every day, every week, every month matters. And so I'm always telling people that, like, when I write in an email, it's like, hey, this person wants this. Oh, by the way, I don't know if you remember, but every week matters. So if you could give this to us sooner, they want it tomorrow. Cause like HIPAA, you only have to get like the documents we talked about, you have 30 days to comply, but 30 days, that's a whole cycle, right? Like that's another cycle. So if someone wants to see something in their records or they want to check something, or they want to go have a second opinion, like they've just lost another cycle. And so people, a lot of times that's another reason people don't like fight things or go look somewhere else or ask for a second opinion. Cause they're thinking, well, what if that's the cycle I would have got pregnant, right? Or what if that's, so it's just like, that's what's hard.
The clinics have 30 days to get that material to you, the records. And then with a lawyer's help, it could speed up the process.
Well, I can't technically speed up HIPAA. Like HIPAA allows 30 days.
Yeah.
Okay. I will just say that there is definitely sometimes if it comes from me, like they just send it faster. I don't know if they shouldn't. They should send it fast no matter what, but HIPAA technically gives them 30 days. So like, but that's the thing is people will say, hey, I really wanted to see this because I think for whatever reason, like I want a second opinion or I'm not sure, or like, I wish I would have seen my blood work right before my transfer, just to say like, people want to do these supplements or they want to do supplements is another thing that like, you have to kind of look at, who's recommending it and what are they recommending and that kind of stuff. But that's another thing where it's like people will Google and it will say, someone says, oh, I could never get pregnant. And then I took, I don't know, whatever, like CoQ10 is a big one, right? And then I got pregnant. And so like, maybe it's also because of this or that. So that's a hard thing is it's like, there's just so much information out there and then people trying to sift through. And I'm like, CoQ10 is not going to hurt you. Like go for it. Whatever if it's like, it makes you feel better. I mean, I did acupuncture and like, I don't know if it helped, but I got pregnant that time and I just needed to do something different. So
there's so many scenarios. I mean, you think about the culture, the medium that these embryos are stored in. I know there's been lawsuits on that because not every clinic probably uses the same medium, right?
Yeah.
Or they don't thaw properly. What were you saying?
Yeah. No, you're right. Like we have some of those cases, the culture media cases. Yeah. I mean, like when we were talking about, I mean, that's one of the big things too, is like, what are the parameters in place to make sure that these things are doing what they're saying? Because I feel like even with that, it seemed like it took a while before these people got phone calls saying, hey, I mean, we have people who like, when we're talking about errors, get a phone call saying, hey, there was an error from your June 2023 test or whatever, like, and they're going,
like years ago.
Right. Like, it was like, well, I don't know if let's see, that was, I mean, just like, like a period of time passes, they might do another retrieval. They might, cause based on those results, right? Like they got those results, they go do another retrieval, they go do other things. And then it's like, oh, sorry, there was an error or this culture media thing. Like, oh, sorry, all those embryos, now have issues because they were in culture media. Like people make huge decisions, they move forward and mistakes happen, but it's like, those need to be quick. Like people need to know because they've got to move their journey forward. And the fact that like, sometimes those things don't get discussed right away. Like they don't get told right away, or they're not caught right away. Like one of our experts even said, he goes, he had certain ways that he was saying these protocols in place that they should be catching these errors sooner. So like because people they need to know, they need to make decisions. Cause like we talked about every cycle, every week, especially if you're getting to their ages that they don't want, they say it's harder and that kind of thing. So
you're a wealth of knowledge, girl. You helping so many people. I mean, I think it's been over an hour and I'm just like, we could talk. I have so many more questions. I mean, just think about transporting embryos, right? And I remember going at ASRM and learning about companies that have people you pay for to accompany your embryos when they are transferred, right? State to state, like a little courier.
Right. Yeah, I know. I get worried about, well, and like rebiopsying, like people have asked about rebiopsying. They're like, should it, I want to retest it because I want to see that. And I'm like, the hard thing is embryos are fragile and they've worked hard on this biopsy process, but like, just the process of thawing them and then rebiopsying them and then refreezing them and then rethaw. And, and people are like, I just lost an embryo because they thawed it again. I'm like, not that they didn't thaw it again, but like they thawed it for transfer, let's say. And they're like, and it puts so much stress, but they're like, well, I was told I should retest because the results might be different or, so it's just like stuff like that where, yeah. And same thing with the movement, moving them, like they have a great process for it, but things happen in movement. Like that's why I freaked out about the Alabama thing because they got rid of all liability. And I was telling my husband, I was like, if there's no liability and someone sadly gets behind the, I was just like, what is the plan if something like heaven forbid happens and this person runs into a wall, right? Like, and like, and that's what's so sad about the Alabama thing is like what happened to those embryos is awful. Like the fact that but what kind of got lost in that process was why was that person able to get in there? Like, why was there not security to keep them out? Like, why was someone wandering in and able to pull them out? Like, that's what I thought was so crazy. And, and we have to be very careful about our wording. I tell people all the time, like, we all know that embryos are very important to us, but we have to be like smart about this because, politics has them in different ways and we have to be that kind of stuff. But that's what I thought was so sad about the Alabama thing is I felt like we all focused on certain words and certain terminology and what the court did, but it was like, wait a minute, someone walked into like a facility and took embryos and dropped them, like, and they weren't even like, they didn't even work there. And it's just like, why is that happening? Why could that happen? And you'd be amazed at the things that happen. Like, it's just, yeah. So that's what I thought was so sad about that thing. And then when we took away all liability, I was like, okay, but here's the thing. Like by taking away all liability, then if something like that happens, who's responsible? And like, that will never bring those embryos back. But like the fact that there was, whatever the security wasn't there, or, if someone's driving that truck and they look down at their phone and then crash and these embryos are stuck in these tanks for too long and then we lose them because it's just like that kind of stuff is a little bit scary where I'm like, okay, I don't want you to have to call me for any issues, but like, I also don't want it to be where I'm not available because if there's no accountability, then like then things won't be taken care of. And that's kind of what we want with everything with IVF. I feel like is, I want it to exist, but like we have to look at things. We have to keep people accountable. I think there's people doing amazing work. Like anyone who's been through it, I feel like, you have this podcast, you have like, you speak out, you put things online, like everyone who's been through it that I've met that like utilizes their voice and their platform. Like I'm so amazed by all of them because it's like, okay, how we all love it. We're all thankful for it, but we see issues within it. And like, how do we help the next person or how do we help other people around us? And I think that's such like an amazing thing to do. And so I love being like ASRM was just one component of talking to everybody, but I feel like I talk to people, I'm texting people all the time where I'm like, yes, like, that's great. We should do that. How do we help these people? How do we like make this process, better or help patients? Cause I feel like patient voice is like a huge part of it. So
you're incredible. I'm so grateful to be connected with you. And this has been like,
hopefully
so
nobody needs me. That's really the goal. Hopefully but no, it's,
wow. Well,
no, but I appreciate your, like, I feel like you do a good job of like bringing a funny side to this too, which is like so hard sometimes. Like, I think, I don't know, like there's certain things you post where I'm like there's a way that you're able to talk about things, but then like bring a lightheartedness sometimes, which is difficult.
That means so much. Wow.
Yes. No.
Wow. Well, I adore you. And I'll include your firm, your info, you're the IVF advocate. And we're all here to help people and using our voices, raising awareness, like just to know that you're behind this, like with bringing attention to so many cases and just you're advocating, you're speaking up. Like I'm grateful for you. And I know so many others are too. This has been a really valuable talk.
Thanks. I appreciate trying. At least I said like, I think sometimes people mishear it or misconstrue what we're trying to do or what I'm trying to do. And then it like hurts my heart. Cause I feel like I'm, when I talk to people, I'm like, that's not what the goal is. That's not what we're trying to do. But, it's hard if you just read if you read between the lines or you don't really hear what we're saying, I think it's hard to make sure people understand what we're trying to accomplish. So, all right. So I appreciate you having me on. This was so much fun and trying to talk about all these things.
Like I said, there's probably a million other things we could chat about, but we focus a lot on genetic testing, which I think is so important. And just, you've given like a lot for us to all consider, and can't thank you enough. You're amazing.
Chris.
Love you, girl. Bye.
You too. Bye.